Right, percents. What does the word percent mean? Why do we use percents? How are percents related to fractions and decimals? Have you ever thought about these questions? Take a minute to think about them and get your answers to those. So percent literally means per hundred or parts per hundred. Percent comes from the Latin percentum. The Latin word centum means 100. For example, a century is 100 years. When we write 40%, this is equivalent to 40 per 100, which is equivalent to the fraction 40 over 100. The name of this fraction is 40 hundredths, which is the equivalent to the decimal 40 hundredths. We write 0.40. Some fractions can be written as equivalent fractions with 100 in the denominator. This makes it easy to call them percents. So why do we use percents? Well, percents are really nice to compare values. So let's say you had two different students with quizzes. One student got 20 out of 25. The other student got 17 out of 18. It's hard to compare those unless we use common denominators and those kinds of things. But if we make them percents, it's easier to compare because it's making them have the same denominator of 100. And percents are familiar to us. Percents are a way to evaluate the performance of someone or something. For example, on a test, in a game, any statistics we use for sports, those kinds of things. Percents can be used to quantify changes. If things have increased or decreased, or if we have something on sale for a discount. So how are percents related to fractions and decimals? Well, percents are just a different way to write the values of fractions and decimals, but they all have the same value. Converting from a percent to a fraction or a decimal. What if you're given a percent? How can you convert it to a decimal? And how can you convert it to a fraction? Let's try these. So 42% and 78%. If you remember that it's per 100, that will really help you make these conversions. So I could write 42 hundredths as a decimal and as a fraction. And then when I'm writing as a fraction, usually I simplify. So it would be 21 fiftieths. So 42% is the same as 42 hundredths as a decimal, as well as a fraction, and then we simplify the fraction to 21 over 50. 78% can be thought of as 78 hundredths. I can write that as a decimal and as a fraction, and again, I simplify the fraction to 39 over 50. But percents aren't always that easy. It gets trickier when we have very large or very small numbers, or when we have fractions involved. So how would you convert the following fractions to a decimal and a simplified fraction? Think about that. It still means the same thing, per 100, but when we have that repeating decimal, or when we have that fraction, right, of 2/3, we have to really think about this. So the first thing I remembered was that 2/3 is a 0, a decimal point, and 6's repeating. So if you think of that per 100, remember to get from a fraction to a percent, or from a percent from a decimal, you're going to multiply by 100, which would move your decimal point over 2 to the right. So if I write 0.6 with a line over it, that is going to be my decimal equivalent of 66 2/3%. And the simplified fraction of 2/3 is that 6 repeating. So my simplified fraction is 2/3. My decimal is a 0, a decimal point, and a 6 with a line over it. With 1/2%, the first thing I did was write my 1/2 as 0.5 or 5/10, Then I knew to make it a decimal, I have to divide it by 100. So I move my decimal point 2 to the left, which gives me 5 thousandths. Then I can write, here's my decimal, and here's my fraction. 5 over 1,000 simplifies to 1 over 200. So sometimes you have to use some prior knowledge and some thinking to make sure you're converting it correctly. Here's a great assignment. I give you either the fraction, the decimal, or the percent, and you give me the other two versions. So if you write the decimal, make sure you put a bar over the repeat end. We don't have any fractions in our decimals. And when we write percents, fractional remainders are the best way to write it, so you don't confuse those decimal points. This is a great activity. I hope you understand fractions, decimals, and percent conversions more clearly.